Hello and welcome to a breakout session from the Trauma Sensitive Institute's 2020 presentation. This breakout group is Educators in Secondary Stress, How to Respond to Your Own Secondary Stress Response. My name is Laura DiPolito. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm starting my 15th year in the district. I'm also a TCI trainer and my 25th year working in Schenectady, the city. I was in private practice for a long time and have been practicing as a clinician for 20, it'll be my 25th year, yeah. I have to think about how old my children are. And I am super blessed and thankful to have Alicia Backus as our facilitator and moderator today. She's also a licensed clinical social worker and has been in the district working as a clinician and is now working in administrative roles. And please, we would ask that while you're at this particular breakout session, if you have any questions or concerns or even comments or feedback, make sure you put them in the chat box to all. Alicia's going to be watching that for me and bringing up things I miss, which will likely happen because I'm going to be very focused on this training. So welcome. We're going to be talking a bit today about secondary stress. And I wanted to start by just kind of explaining to you why I got interested in this topic. Quite a few years ago, I had joined the district. I became really good friends with teachers. Most of my friends are teachers or educators. And even before I worked for the district, but now much more so. And I noticed that teachers were the people on the front line getting exposed to a lot of trauma and hearing a lot of traumatic stories and really taking it home with them. We'd be going for walks and friends would tell me about something that happened during their day that a child had shared with them. Or people would be describing a lot of disruption to their lives because they were so worried about kids. And it really struck me that educators don't often get instruction, direct instruction and education about self-care. Social workers do as part of our training, although, light bulb moment, I also need self-care. And I'm not particularly adept at it. It's not a one-time you do this, cross it off the list kind of thing. It's something that you have to do day after day. I was going to say year after year, day after day, and keep up on so that you can take care of yourself. So, this is not something just because I was educated in it and that I think about often. It doesn't mean that I have this down at all. And I'm going to share with you some of the places where I have pitfalls and problems as well today, and hope you'll be willing to do the same so we can learn from each other, okay? Specifically, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about trauma and why educators are more susceptible to secondary trauma, some signs to look for in your life if that's what's going on. And then before we leave, you're going to set some SMART goals for yourselves around self-care. Okay? You ready? Let's go. Maybe. There we go. So we're just going to briefly talk a little bit about what I mean by trauma. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. I know you've been in sessions all day talking about trauma, but I want to remind you that trauma can be a one-time singular event, like a car accident, or I actually recently heard someone tell me a story about a medical trauma that the experience they had having a medical procedure done. It was very traumatic, but it was a one-time singular stressful event. There can be intermittent trauma that has a start and end date, but it kind of happens on and off during that start and end date. And then there's ongoing trauma. And I want to differentiate between that because knowing that our children are living in ongoing trauma, the children that we have day-to-day contact with, can be extraordinarily stressful. An example of this would be the trauma of racism and poverty that a lot of our children are living with, and knowing that they have this ongoing, no end in sight, no hope to the ceasing from the day to day of what they're facing can be very traumatic to us as educators trying to overcome it and being present with them and being open to their experiences. Intermittent trauma might be something more like domestic violence that a child was exposed to that was on and off over years, okay? Very powerful and important to name trauma. Naming trauma helps people shift their perspective, and it helps them realize that it's not something that's going wrong within them, but something that happened to them. And that's really an important shift because it can decrease your negative response. We experience trauma directly by experiencing it personally. We can witness it by being a bystander. We can learn it happened to someone we're close to and care about. And we can have repeated and extreme exposure to details. Today, we're going to talk a lot about number 4, repeated and extreme exposure to details, because that is the kind of trauma that educators often are experiencing and then have secondary stress responses to. I will point out, though, that I think the COVID crisis has given us the experience with the number 3 example. I know I have a good friend. She was diagnosed with COVID. And I haven't seen her in a really long time, but I wanted to know all the details, right? I was really horrified that something like this could happen to someone. I wanted to know, how did it start? What treatment is she getting? Is she feeling better? I'm like checking in with her every few days. How are you feeling? I'm probably driving her crazy. But when I heard about her being diagnosed with COVID, it actually created an anxiety response in me, a trauma response in me. I care about her, and it feels like it could happen to me if it could happen to someone so close, right? So there's that kind of hearing about something, but also just repeated exposure to details of children telling us about their experiences. Sadly, 3 out of 5 American children experience trauma. I know you know the statistic. That means 3 out of 5 adults had trauma experiences when they were kids as well. Important to remember, okay? So why are educators vulnerable? Teachers are having relationships with students. We want you to have relationships with students. We know that when you have a relationship with your students, they're better open to learning with you and being vulnerable and taking a one-down position that they need to take and accept feedback and correction. And children want to talk to their teachers about their experiences. Kids are really excited to share their lives with teachers that they trust. Kids also will act out trauma. I talked a little bit before about if you come to TCI trainings with me, I had a student who would repeatedly smash his face into a mat and into a wall until he gave himself a bloody nose. And I, for the longest time, couldn't figure out what was going on and spent some time processing with mom, and later learned that she had been repeatedly beaten and had bloody noses. And he was trying to communicate what had happened. He was a very young learner. So he was acting it out and showing it to me. And of course, without the context, I didn't know what I was seeing, but I was seeing something that was very disorganizing to me when I'd see it, and horrifying to see a child hurt themselves that way. Um, Learners also tell you details, and sometimes kids talk about things that would be traumatic for us to hear about because we have a different context for it. And they tell you about it like what they had for breakfast because it's their baseline, it's their normal. And an example of this would be we've had kids come in and tell us about a fight between their parents that was particularly violent and scary. But when they're telling us, it's just that's kind of become the norm, and that's what happened. And the teachers are hearing it, and the teachers are absorbing their own emotional responses and their feelings about that child that they care about and they've been working with, experiencing something so frightening. Okay? So you're vulnerable. There's a difference between compassion fatigue, which is what I'm calling secondary stress, and occupational burnout. Occupational burnout, when people say they're crispy, or they're burnt out, it typically revolves more around repetitiveness of tasks and not being exposed to traumatic details that have exhausted you, that are reenacting in your life. Okay, so occupational burnout might be quicker to fix, something that you would be able to moderate with a few days off, some time away from the activity, and then going back to the activity, you feel refreshed and like you can do it. Okay, right. So before we move on, I did a kind of a quick overview there of, what is trauma? What are we talking about today? Everybody pretty clear on that, or have any questions or concerns about how we're defining trauma and secondary trauma for the purpose of this PD?
Currently, there's nothing in the chat, so if anybody has, somebody just wrote clear. If anybody has any questions, just put in there that you want me to unmute you, and then you can ask the question, or you can just put it in the chat also, please.
Okay. So I figured that would be a review for folks, but I wanted to make sure I took a few minutes to just do an overview so we're all on the same page. All right. So there are 4 common responses, and by common I mean normative responses to an abnormal situation of a traumatic event, and doing this work. And we're going to go through all 4 and just kind of detail out how that can look. But they are intrusive thoughts, hypervigilance or feeling on edge, avoidance, and cognitive and emotional changes within the person who's giving the care to the child with trauma. So intrusive thoughts often will emerge in the form of dreams or nightmares. And this is obviously something you don't have control over what you dream about at night. It's your brain's way of working through information that was given to you. So sometimes the nightmare will be exactly what you were told. Sometimes it might be some variation on it where you're the person in the dream having the scary experience, or it's happening to a child that you in your family system, or it might not even make sense, but you'll be starting to have nightmares. Okay. And the intrusive thoughts are pretty disruptive because you don't have control over it. You can't stop it. You can't shift your brain and redirect. This can include, by the way, thinking about students outside the school day and not thinking about them like, oh, I can't wait to read this book. Or like today I got this thing in the mail that I ordered a long time ago. It's a mindful kids activity. I'm super excited about it. Not quite that level of thinking about them. It's thinking more about, oh, I'm really worried about Bobby. I hope Bobby's okay. I hope Bobby's not having that experience again, or finding yourself excessively worried about what will happen the next day. Okay. Often intrusive thoughts are a way that your brain is re-experiencing the stories told to you. The on edge or hypervigilance is the clinical phrase, is that feeling like you're going to jump or be really on edge, that you expect something else negative to happen. That doesn't mean that logically anything negative will happen again. And you can understand that in your brain, but your body is feeling more on edge. And this is highly associated with irritability. So, I will share with you that my own experience of secondary stress, I really struggled with irritability. And if someone had said to me, Laura, I think you're having some secondary stress, they would have gotten an irritable response probably, because I didn't want to look at it that way. But I was on edge and kind of waiting for the next shoe to drop or the next bad thing to happen. The fourth component of secondary stress that we look for is avoidance. And this isn't always necessarily logical. Sometimes people will start to avoid people related to school, including going to PLCs, including going to your team meetings, coming up with reasons not to. I know that when I really struggled with my secondary stress response, I would avoid team meetings with the social work department just by, I might be sick that day, or I might have had a hard time facing my colleagues and talking about what was going on and hearing their trauma as well. So that avoidance was a sign that I was really struggling with something. It also can include avoiding feelings that come up with thinking about school, and getting irritable when people want to talk about school. Someone in the morning session had generously shared that they had had an experience of anxiety after being in a team meeting talking about going back to school, and had a really strong avoidance reaction, like, I can't do any prep work, it's too much. And that's pretty normative, as well as that irritability around it and not wanting to have those feelings. People will also avoid PD, and because they don't want to think about the topics or have to face the ugliness of what's bothering them or the reality. Alicia, is there a question?
There is a question. So the question is, what would be your advice for someone who has anxiety, who essentially always is on edge to some degree? And how do you advise separating a new trigger, school-specific trigger, from your everyday anxiety response?
Well, good for you for recognizing if you already have a baseline level of anxiety. That's one of your personal factors we're going to talk about in a little bit. But I would highly advise you engage closely with a therapist, and also not be afraid to try medication management for anxiety. One of the probably easiest things to treat in the mental health system in terms of being straightforward, people know how they're going to respond to the meds, are the anti-anxiety meds. So if that's not something you're trying, that's something I would highly recommend, especially when you're going through an anxiety time. It doesn't even have to be an ongoing med. There could be like a PRN, take as needed. But being able to also talk in therapy and be able to differentiate out, this is what I'm anxious about versus this is my overall level of anxiety. We're also going to talk in a little bit, before you leave, you're going to have an action plan, because I really like leaving people empowered. So we're going to have an action plan about some strategies, and maybe after you see that, you'll feel like you could try a few of those on and see if those would be helpful for easing your overall anxiety too, okay? So if you can be patient with me, I'm going to remember that question when we get further into the training. Okay. The fourth area that we talk about where you see secondary stress in people is changes in how you're thinking and feeling. And what's important here is changes, okay? So different from your baseline. And that can include feeling guilty, having some desire to isolate. I know that, again, when I was struggling with a lot of secondary stress symptoms, I did not want to see friends who worked for the district because I didn't want to talk about that stuff. And I didn't really want to see my friends who didn't work in the field because I was like, they don't really understand either. So all of a sudden, I'm left alone with my thoughts a lot more. And that was a big change from my baseline. Feeling hopeless, feeling disconnected, and not wanting to connect. An increase in anger, a decrease in creativity, and being able to be playful at your job and at home. Excessive fatigue, feeling like it's almost like you're moving through mud. And noticing that you're not listening to kids anymore, and not wanting to hear the stories. The story that I tell people about this for me is I had a student die by gun violence many years ago, and it was related, they thought, to some street violence. And before that, I was able to listen to kids and take information in and categorize it in my head and think about what they were telling me. But after my student had passed away, future times when I'd sit with students and they'd want to talk about street violence and gang behavior, I couldn't absorb it. I couldn't listen. And it was really important for me to notice that and go, whoa, my brain is saying, protect yourself. This is too much. So that was a big flag for me that I was getting into a danger place. But if you're getting critical, snappy with kids, mood changes, some cynicism, a lack of belief that you can make things better, just overall sadness and grief that's taking over your life, you might be in this spot. You might be struggling with secondary stress. We are particularly vulnerable as an educator because of our student population. We have a high percentage of children living in poverty, and living in poverty in and of itself is a trauma. There are a lot of traumas associated with that as well. Also, living with parents who have alcohol and drug use, which crosses all socioeconomic status, that's very traumatic for children. And as an educator, you're going to see children in your classroom whose parents are abusing substances and all of the traumas that go along with that for children that they care for. I started this list with SPED. We have a lot of children who are classified special education learners who also have really serious trauma histories. And we, especially because we've been focusing more on mental health in recent years in our special education department and lifting those children up. LGBT youth also have a high percentage of experiences of trauma by being bullied and experiencing homophobia within the society. That includes also, it goes to the immigrant population, experiences with racism, and experiences with racism in general are all very traumatic. So our children are coming to us and we are vulnerable because of the position we're in as educators. You may also have some personal characteristics. You may have your own trauma history. You may have your own mental health issue with anxiety or depression and lean toward the anxious or lean toward the depressed. Your own trauma, if you were in any if you were in any trainings today that talked about your ACE score, your own ACE score, your own experiences with traumatic events, but also your own resiliency factors. What is it about you that maybe made you come into education and made you more resilient? And those factors will balance out some of your history. Also, empathy. The best educators I've worked with are very empathic toward their learners. But empathy, if you've heard the language around being an introvert or an empath, people will absorb energy from other people and can really take in the experiences that children are having and make them their own and get very intimately involved in their hearts with the kids. And that makes it hard for you to differentiate your own stress level from the children's. The school environment itself can also make you vulnerable. And by that,
Laura, if you can hear me, you just froze. Okay, hold on, everyone. She'll be back. It looks like she's having some technical difficulties.
Did you lose me for a minute?
Yes, Laura, we lost you.
Okay. I don't know what happened there, and I apologize. This happened yesterday around this time of day too. So you didn't hear about school environment, I'm assuming?
No.
Okay. I just mentioned that, being in an environment that acknowledges that this is hard work, that this is traumatic, and that self-care is important. That's an emerging theme in our district, but it's emerging, it's emerging in our field. I don't think that we've always known that about education. And so, if you're in a setting that's supportive of self-care, really important to acknowledge. Okay. So we're going to pause here. I'm going to go through these 6 life domains that are impacted by secondary traumatic stress responses. And then I'm going to ask people if you recognize any of them. And don't panic, because we're going to go through some slides that tell you how to work in each domain, some suggestions of things you could try to make yourself feel better. And the first is occupational distress. And this, if you're having a decrease in overall motivation, you're avoiding work, you're noticing irritability, and you're sensitive to criticism, this might be a domain that you might go, maybe I'm being affected by the secondary stress at work. Really important to pay attention to. Also, emotional domain, and that can mean dysregulated moods where you can't control your emotional responses. So if you're old enough to remember Hallmark commercials, a lot of people used to joke that they make you cry, and they're supposed to make you cry. That's the normal response to a Hallmark commercial. Some people would say, oh my gosh, I started watching the Hallmark commercial, I was bawling, I couldn't stop, they couldn't regulate it. I have a good friend, he was telling me the other day that he had seen like a Hallmark commercial and he was just bawling, and he's like, I couldn't regulate myself, I couldn't self-soothe, I couldn't stop. And I was like laughing at him because he was having an authentic moment there, but it had touched something that a student had told him, and it reminded him of that feeling. Also, if you're having a hard time managing anger, and anger is a big part of depression and anxiety, as well as irritability, and something to look for. If you're noticing that your anger is incongruent to the situation, where you're like, wow, maybe I'm being a little too upset here given what's really happening, important to notice. So that's your emotional domain. It might be impacting your exposure, might be impacting your cognitive domain, and that includes organizational issues. And I don't mean like, where's your car keys? Or organizational issues around normal aging brain like I have. I'm talking about normally you're able to keep track of organizing papers for students while also planning an activity, and you're not able with your executive functioning to function in the same way you were able to do before. You also might be noticing a decrease in focus or a decrease in your concentration and your ability to concentrate. Social, and this is that distrustfulness, that sense of isolation we were talking about. Maybe you're avoiding people. Sometimes people feel really ashamed as well. Being a teacher, I don't think anyone expects teachers to have as much exposure to the stories that kids are exposing us to. And so, it's not like we're EMTs or we work in an emergency room. And so some people have a lot of embarrassment over their response, which by the way is normal, but it's counterproductive to you getting better. You might also notice some increase in cynicism. Somebody said to me when I started in the district, it is what it is. And I'm like, okay, that's radical acceptance. I like that. But we also can change what it is once we accept what it is if we don't like it. So there's that social piece of what people do. And then there's a physical component. And I want to go really slowly here and think about how when we're under stress, we have heart rate changes, our breathing changes, our digestion changes. People describe having constipation. They also describe having pretty bad stomach aches and diarrhea. People describe their sleep being disrupted because they're awake at night worrying, or the other way, they tend to sleep more because it's hard to wake up. People describe weight gain. They describe self-medication, getting home and the only way they can take off the day is to have a beer or a glass of wine or a few. They describe headaches, lethargy, and all of this can also be a sign of a compromised immune system. None of us can afford a compromised immune system right now. That's just not something we can afford. With COVID-19 going into the school year, it is very typical to go back to school, and most people get a little bit of a cold. The September sniffles is what I used to call them at Ready to Learn. And, that's from getting back into a sleep routine and maybe pushing yourself a little hard and then being around other people who might have the sniffles, right? So this year, there's an extra motivation for us to take care of ourselves so that we don't get those September sniffles or any other bugs that are circulating. The sixth life domain that we want you to think about is the spiritual one. A lot of folks find that being exposed to trauma makes them further from God or their source. There's a lot of questioning, blaming the higher power. How could God let this happen to this child? It doesn't seem fair. People have described avoiding going to church, isolating from their worship community, and just loss of comfort and peace in scripture and in worship that used to bring them some calmness. So, it's very common to have problem areas that overlap. These don't exist in isolation from each other, but we've kind of run through the six. Is anyone willing to share when hearing this, like, oh my gosh, that's happened to me and what that looked like in your life? No?
Not yet.
Okay. That's okay if you don't want to. Um, you know, this is hard to do. This is hard to recognize, and it's a little scary.
Somebody just wrote, wake up abruptly in the middle of the night.
Yeah, that is a common, that is a very common sleep disturbance is probably the cornerstone of when we see mental health symptoms. Sleep disturbance is usually the beginning and the end of how to solve that. Because without good sleep, your brain can't produce the chemicals it needs to regulate you. Coming home, I couldn't, they're coming out really fast.
All right, I'll read from the beginning, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So the waking up abruptly. My first year, I'd fall asleep the moment I got home because it was exhausting. Thinking about the school day, my sleep has changed drastically. This year really impacted my health with bringing up a lot of my own trauma. I still don't feel right. It looks like coming home and taking the mask off and apologizing to my kids for my mood a lot.
Oh, okay.
Hold on. I sought out a therapist for bad anxiety. Most of what I talked about was worry about my students. What are the six? Repeat, please. Thanks.
Okay.
And then my anxiety, and I often wake up and have trouble going back to sleep as I worry about what is going through my head. This is happening a lot right now. And with going back to school, I can relate to the isolation piece. And some days in my program, I just need time to decompress before being around others. The hour commute helps.
Mm-hmm.
Relate to the isolation piece. Okay. Yep. Sorry. Not wanting to socialize with family, just rest my mind physically exhausted, waking up in the middle of the night or not being able to fall into a restful sleep. I also find myself crying at things that I shouldn't.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. First of all, thank you. You guys shared a lot of experiences that tell me that people are experiencing symptoms of secondary stress. And it looks like anxiety and depression. It really does. And it feels like anxiety and depression because it is related to it. Diagnostically, post-traumatic stress disorder and secondary stress disorder in the diagnostic manual are in the anxiety chapter. And if you've ever suffered from any anxiety, you can quickly understand how that suffering makes you depressed and feel pretty hopeless because it's so uncomfortable. So the six domains, thank you for sharing. I see, and people are still sharing. I love that you're willing to share with each other because sharing with each other is a way to immunize yourselves and realize that you're not alone. okay? That this is a common experience among helpers. And I say helpers because, when I was in graduate school, I knew I wanted to become a therapist. I knew I wanted to do trauma work. So to get inoculated against secondary stress, I read everything I could about resiliency and how to take care of myself. And then I thought, I was young, smarty pants. I was like, no, I'm good. And no one is immune from this. It's no one. Okay. And it's something that no matter how much training you take in it, no matter how much time you take, each day is a new day with it. And you have to refuel every day on this. Okay. Someone had said, what are the 6 domains? They're the words that are right next to the triangles on the screen right now. So occupational, emotional, cognitive, social, physical, and spiritual. And the good news is if you recognize a lot of symptoms in one domain, the next few slides, we're going to talk about solutions for each of these domains. Because what I'm hopeful about is that we're going to be able to come up with some plans for you that you're going to come up with for yourself, that you're going to implement in place like a goal, the way you would write a goal for a student, like a SMART goal. And it's going to have a specific target intervention to target one of these domains, or maybe more, but not too many because I don't want you to stress yourselves out. Okay? So, the self-care movement. A few years ago, became an extremely popular bit of language where people talked about self-care and self-love. And when it first came out, I'm going to be really frank with you. I was really like, I don't want anything to do with this. It's one more thing to do. And I felt really ashamed. I felt like, my boss was saying to me, well, you're having these responses because you're not taking good enough care of yourself. And right away, it's one more thing that I messed up. It's one more thing that I can't achieve. And it really reinforced a sense that I was powerless. I'm powerless to help my patients. I'm powerless to help the students. I'm powerless to help myself. Um, and there are some significant obstacles to self-care. Like, let's be really honest, there's time in the day, and there's the realities of what the day looks like in a building. If you've never worked in education, for example, you might not know the joy of holding your bladder to the point where you almost explode. So like there are certain realities to the obstacles. And if we know what the obstacles are, it's just like the trauma. If we can name it, we can deal with it. We can start to plan around it. But we do work in a very special environment that is prone to secondary stress because it is special. It's specific. There's nothing else quite like it. I have a good friend who's an ER nurse, and she tells me about her job, and I listen, and she's like, "Is it like what you do?" And I'm like, "Oh no, no, what you do is totally different, and that's okay. It just sounds really stressful in a different way." But having empathy and recognizing that the self-care movement was put out there, I think, with the best of intentions, but it's okay if you feel irritable about people talking about self-care because it's like they're putting it back on you. And darn it, can't the world just be a better place and easier, right? So that's something just to be aware of, that it was a big movement a few years ago. I think we're kind of moving into a more gentler, realistic self-care. So we're going to talk about strategies in the occupational setting first. Okay? So remember, in the occupational setting, I had said to you, you might be having some decreased morale, some avoidance, some irritability at work. And this, you got to name it. You got to be able to talk about it and say, I'm having secondary stress, and start with PD. Now, why I say PD, and you can't do PD every single day, okay? But PD is a place where you go to learn things that might excite you again about work. That's really the function of PD, right? You learn something, you learn a tool. When you leave, you're excited, you want to go implement it. The other thing is, you're not alone in PD. You look around, even in a Zoom room, like right now, and when everybody was just sharing, we're all in this together. And when people are authentic, they're going, yeah, I have bladder infections. I'm not taking care of myself. Oh yeah, I can't sleep at night. Oh yeah, I wake up. Oh yeah, I'm really tired. And people are going, oh, I'm not alone. PD is a great place for you to talk with other educators about your struggles and not feel alone. Meeting with your colleagues to discuss student need is really, really important. One of the challenges I saw for my friends who are educators when I first joined the district is I would hear them say, I'm worried about this kid. And I'd be like, who are you telling at the school? Well, I don't want to violate the kid's confidentiality. You are not violating a student's confidentiality by sharing with your teammates a traumatic event that a child had. You're actually teaming with other people who already have contact with that student. Really important to note that you have to clarify with your colleagues what you are looking for. You're looking for a sounding board. You expect them not to say anything to the student afterward or to problem solve, that you just want to make sure the team is all aware. So, for example, you're aware that a student witnessed a shooting outside of his apartment over the weekend. Really important to share that information with the PE teacher and also the math teacher who's pushing into your room that the student may be off because he had a scary experience over the weekend. You're not asking them to talk to that student about that event, nor are you going to talk any further. But that way, you're not the holder of that information. You shared it and let a little bit out. Okay. Another occupational strategy, and I'm going to own I'm really bad at this, is boundaries around work hours. I work as a PPS staff member, and we have a longer day than teachers, so I always come in a bit earlier. But I struggle with getting out on time. I really do, because it seems like after the day gets going, it just takes off, and I can't even catch its tail. So I struggle with this, but I do set a timer on my phone to remind me, oh, Laura, this is the time you should be going home. And when I'm home, I try extremely hard to no longer do any billing, prep work, or planning in the evening, unless I have set aside a specific period of time to do so. And I'm very boundaried with it so that I have a home setting that I do that work in. When I go on vacation, I unplug. I put a response on my email that I'm not going to be available. I put a response on my phone that I will be back in the office on such and such a date. Really important to take a vacation. I say that and I kind of pause because I don't know about you guys, but I'm afraid to take a vacation right now because I don't want to leave the state of New York, and where I like to vacation is ocean. So I haven't taken a vacation, and figuring out how to do that safely in the time of COVID and how to unplug. Even more important that I have boundaries around work hours because I'm working from my dining room right now. And being able to then transition to having dinner with my family in this room and not associate it with work. Really, really important to have those boundaries and think about how you're doing that. The final area is to talk about supervision and get support from people who are responsible for working with you. And by that, I mean, not like what time did you come in supervision. I mean supervision of what's going on with your students and get clinical feedback and consultation and support. Okay. So knowing who your PPS team is and knowing who you can go to in your building when you're really worried about a kid so you're not carrying it all on your own shoulders. So those are some strategies in occupational. Hold those in your mind. You might want to pick one for your SMART goal. Emotional strategies are all around building resilience. So resilience basically just means you bounce back, right? So a ball with a lot of resilience, you hit the floor and it bounces right back up. So we've discovered that over the years, ways to bolster resilience in people include having some hobbies that are really fun and outside of your usual work role. So I'll give you an example. I decided during COVID to learn how to needle felt because I always wanted to make those cute little animals. If you know me, you know I love my dogs. And so I wanted to make little felt dogs. And what you don't know maybe is that I'm allergic to wool and you're using wool to do it. So my children tease me. They're like, only you would pick a hobby that requires you to wear gloves because you're allergic to the materials. Was there a question, Alicia?
I'm just trying to read it right now. Hold on.
Okay.
Whenever my anxiety is high, I organize everything in sight, rearrange furniture, and somebody said I can relate to each one.
Yeah, that's a really, home decorating is a great hobby, and caring for your home is really, really fun. I know that cleaning, my daughter, who's 24, called me the other day and she goes, I was really stressed out about XYZ. And she had been exposed to something stressful. And she said, so I angry washed the bathtub. And I went, all right, that's a good hobby. She's definitely my daughter, by the way. When I heard that story, I was like, might have modeled that a few times. But it's also good to have hobbies that are just fun and take your mind off of what's going on. So I made an animal for each kid on my caseload. Some didn't look even remotely like animals because practice makes progress. I'm not perfect. And I made some mobiles for friends who were having babies with my little animals. So it had nothing to do with being a mental health provider. It was just a break from it. Meditation is also a strategy to improve your emotional well-being and your ability to regulate your mood. But I want to say to you important to know, and I'll pause after this screen, Alicia. Meditation takes practice, and meditation is super uncomfortable the first few times you do it. So if you're struggling, maybe the first while that you do it, I said a few times, but it takes some muscle, emotional muscle, to build up the strength to sit with whatever thoughts and feelings come your way. It might be uncomfortable. So you start in little tiny blocks with meditation. Engaging in art, a lot of people enjoy painting and sculpture, and engaging with nature, going on hikes, being outside, gardening, and of course that all important therapy. And I say that all important therapy not because I'm a therapist and I do believe in therapy, but because if you're really suffering, the whole purpose of the field is to help you find strategies to relieve that suffering. So there's no reason you should be suffering along with anxiety like that. You should reach out and see if a therapist can give you some feedback and support. And at the end, we're going to talk about EAP and how to access it. All right, I'm ready for the feedback on this slide.
Okay, so somebody stated, as much as I want a dishwasher, doing the dishes by hand gives me time to process and relax when I'm feeling overwhelmed.
Oh, I like it. I'll show you where my dishes are.
Someone said I spin wool, and I know spinners who are allergic, determined but allergic.
Thank you for sharing that, because my children said that was incongruent for me and that I should rethink it.
Another person said, my gynecologist said teachers have the most problems with the urinary tract because we don't use the bathroom enough.
Yeah.
And then another comment was, I am questioning who I am and will be, and whatever the plan is to go back to school. With all going on in the world, no time to hug, more needed in a world of no more hugging. Some people need the physical support.
Yeah. And that is really the needing, like, physical contact. That is really important, and it's not on here because I didn't want to overdo it with the dogs, but I will tell you that I get a lot of physical sensory input from my dogs over the years. I live with 2 giant golden retrievers. And last night, my partner was laughing because he came into the bedroom and they both were literally on me. And it was like a really lovely weighted blanket. But if you don't have pets, because cats can do that for you too, or dogs, or you don't have a dog that's willing to lay on you, I highly encourage and you don't have anyone to touch you and you're looking for sensory input, I highly encourage you considering getting a weighted blanket for the fall, because they're right. That sensory pressure of being touched and feeling, nothing replaces a hug, nothing at all. But that feeling of closeness, of pressure on you can be substituted with a weighted blanket and can help integrate emotion. It really can. They've done a lot of studies on it. There's some cognitive strategies too. If you're finding that you're losing things and your brain isn't working the best way it could, I'm going to challenge you to build some new skills and challenge yourself outside of your field. So this does not mean this is the time that you are going to be learning how to do a new teaching technique. I'm talking about learn a new instrument, take on a new craft, learn a new language. I am really horrible at puzzles, and I've been sharing that I went on the New York Times and I am doing a puzzle a day only for 10 minutes. So I can't complete it in that time. There's no way. And so for me, it's also learning to sit with some discomfort and some distress tolerance. I'm going, okay, I did the best I could. It's not perfect. It's incomplete. And so there's no pressure on doing that puzzle, and I'm working my brain and keeping my mind going on something completely irrelevant to any stressors about COVID or reopening and all that. Because I hear you guys, and it is a scary time to be in education. I can't ever think of a time before in all my years of being a mental health provider. 9/11 is maybe the closest, but it's nothing like it, where people are carrying around this burden of sadness and grief and anger and fear about what's to come and responsibility for others. It's a really hard time. So you want to give your brain a break from thinking about that. Strategies for social include cultivating a supportive social network. That can't happen overnight. but I'm sure you all have friends that you haven't been in good contact with, or that you've always said, let's have that cup of coffee or let's get together. This is the time to reach out to them. This is the time to say you want to do a Zoom coffee. This is the time to be supportive to someone else, because when you're supportive to someone else, it's actually really good for you too. Celebrate life events. When I was really struggling with secondary stress, I completely stopped celebrating special events like birthdays, anniversaries. And I felt guilty if I was celebrating something good. Like, how can I be celebrating Christmas the year that one of my students was murdered and his family was mourning them? That was really an incongruent experience for me. Now, what I remember is that's why I have to celebrate them, because he couldn't celebrate it anymore. And, I try to celebrate something every day, which my children think is really ridiculous too. But almost every day in my house is National Golden Retriever Day, by the way. So if it's not a real day, like National Donut Day or something, I make it National Golden Retriever Day. But it's fun to have like a party to look forward to, something to look forward to at the end of the day. Like, yeah, we're going to party and celebrate this happening, even the little things. Coffee dates. I had a really good friend. She just retired from Mohonasen schools as a social worker. I'm proud of her and happy for her and jealous. And she worked 30 years, so she earned it. But we would meet one Friday a month at 4 o'clock, and we'd have coffee. Well, I'd have coffee, she'd have tea. It doesn't have to be coffee. And we did that to practice getting out on time for the weekends and making sure that you leave work on time for meetups with friends. Super important, because it sets a hard boundary on your day and allows you to transition to something new. So, if you have young children at home that you're caring for and you're rushing from one job of caring for children during the day to caring for your own children, if you don't have something in between there that's just for you every now and then, that can really be disruptive to your own mental health. And that's why having the social strategy can be really important, to actually plan it. I saw someone said they worked at Mohonasen. Did you know Ms. Rings, Eileen Rings? She's my friend that I'm jealous of. And I'm proud of her and I'm happy for her. I'm well jealous. Okay. I said that to her in person. She's like, I'm jealous of you. You still are young. I'm like, I don't know. Strategies for physical. Okay, guys, this is going to seem really simple, but let's pause. Eat. How many of us eat during the school day? We don't have time. We're rushing from one event to another and moving about. Make sure every 3 hours you take a few minutes. It doesn't have to be a half hour, and put some food in your mouth. Drink water. I know it means you have to take a bathroom break, but it's okay. You need to drink water every day. We had a very well-known therapist, trauma specialist, come into town years ago, Dr. Macy, and he pointed out that we needed to have our brains hydrated to think clearly. Try to sleep 8 to 10 hours a night. Does that seem crazy right now? I know we've all been sleeping in a little bit, not just because it's summer, but we got used to waking up a little bit later, maybe to meet the students later in the morning and work later in the day. So that's going to mean you're going to have to transition now to practice to sleeping. Exercise. Don't go run a marathon, for goodness sake, but movement that's intentional and fun. And please, if I can impress anything, avoid alcohol and drugs, because it's going to exacerbate any symptoms that you have. And for spiritual strategies, I want you to sit back and think about what the meaning of your life is. Like, why are you here? And find that meaning. And by the way, it may not be work, and that's okay. The meaning in your life might be totally different, or your work might fit into your spiritual meaning of being here. Finding ways to return to prayer and meditation if it was ever important to you, trying out self-reflection. Okay, so those are the strategies. Now is the time that I'm getting really excited. I know we're getting close to the end of the day, so I'll wrap it up. But I want you to write an action plan. And it's going to be like a SMART goal that you write for your students. First, you got to figure out what your obstacles are going to be. Is it going to be that you feel guilty taking time for yourself? Is it going to be that you don't feel motivated to do this because you've got such low energy? And when people who feel guilty taking time for themselves, I understand this. Do you remember when we could fly in airplanes? And they would say, when you get on the airplane with your children, that if there was a drop in pressure, there would be oxygen masks that would drop down. And I traveled alone with 2 small children a lot. And well, not a lot, but a few times a year. And I would always hear them say, you have to put the mask on yourself and then your children. And I would think in my head, no way in hell am I letting my kids go without oxygen. I'm putting it on them first. And that would mean my children probably would have been standing over their mama without an oxygen mask, passed out. So got to think about that and balance that. I adore my children, but I'm more useful to them awake and alert and oriented than passed out. And that's the same for your students at school. You're more able to serve them if you are taking care of yourself. Okay? So kind of working beyond that guilty self-talk. Remember, we're going to practice this in small bites. I don't want you to think you have to do this perfectly. There's practice makes progress, not perfect. These have to be realistic goals that are measurable. Okay? We also are trying to create a school culture that values self-care. So in that spirit, I want you to think about who in your building you're going to tell your goal to, who can be your accountability buddy and who can hold you accountable. So like here at my house, my partner is my accountability buddy. And he's keeping me when the cell phone goes off and says I have to stop with my puzzle. He's like, you gotta let it go. And I'm like, I just want to finish it. I'm so close. I can have it perfect. And he's like, put it down. He's reminding me that was my goal, is to practice this distress tolerance and learning from my mistakes and not being perfect and being okay with not being perfect. So some goals might sound like you decide you want to work on your sleep. And between now and September 15th, you are going to try to go to bed maybe 4 nights out of 7 initially, then 5 nights out of 7 by 9 o'clock. It might be that measurable goal, or it might be that you want to try to go for a walk with a friend once a week and you're going to set those up. And what I want you to do is make it a measurable goal, something small, nothing big. Write it down. If you want, you can email it to me and I'll hold you accountable if you don't have an accountability buddy. Tell someone, and then on September 15th, you can evaluate, how are you doing? And if you messed up, hooray, you're human, totally okay. You get another chance because after September 15th, we still have like the whole school year to practice. Okay? All right. So these are the resources. I kind of went through those quickly. If you'd like the articles that I used to present this, I can send them to you. But I want to remind you that we have a fantastic EAP program through our district. We're really lucky. I actually have accessed it myself. It's super easy. You call on the phone, you give them some basic information. They give you 3 or 4 sessions that you can come in. They have an office on Franklin Street, but they also have offices all around the Capital Region. You can go outside the school day, sit, talk to them about your stressors, and they'll tell you, yeah, this is secondary stress, or boy, you should go for maybe some more help, and they'll give you some direction. We also have a team of behavior specialists in our district that have developed a website that is very detailed and with resources. So if you're more of a reader kind of person and you don't want to call EAP for help, the behavior specialist website, which is linked to our district website, also offers an entire page about self-care and strategies to take care of yourself, including a quiz to see where you're at. But I'm going to tell you, I took the quiz and you would have thought I was dying. So I don't want to do anything that's negative. I want to reinforce the positive. And there is my email as well. If you want any additional support and coaching on this, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I work for the school district, and I'm really happy to support you in your process with this, because in doing so, it's a way I take care of myself. I pause and I remember, oh yeah, if I'm telling Alicia she needs to do this, I better be accountable too and be a good role model and do it myself. So that is the whole presentation on self-care. It's finished the same amount of time, 7 minutes. Any questions? Any concerns?
So we have a lot of comments
Okay.
that we didn't get to. Somebody wrote, I created a pallet, couch, and table this summer to distress from distant learning. Love using power tools. My dog has been the best during this crazy time. I swear he's my therapy pup.
Awesome.
The stress of being a parent and teacher. I have 2 weighted blankets, one for sitting, 12 pounds, and one for sleeping, 20 pounds. Obviously don't need one that heavy, but would recommend a different weight for sitting versus sleeping. I have ADHD and they are amazing. My co-teacher and I daily Zoom workouts for self-care. Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you. I'm glad I left this class.
Oh, I'm glad you guys found it helpful. And if you're like me a few years ago and you're sitting there and you're going, oh, that all sounds so Pollyanna-ish, I understand. And dude, if you're feeling irritated by what I said, I get you because I've been there and I'm going to tell you you're experiencing secondary stress and I love you and I want you to get some help. Okay. So thank you for the positive comments though, too. And I'm so thankful for the opportunity to talk with you guys about this and wish you all health this fall. The light in me honors the light in each of you. Namaste. Shine bright. Take care. Okay. Thank you. You're very welcome. What a nice group. They're all popping up as
Thank you to you.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
I'm going to stop the recording. Okay.
Okay.